When their only son threw them out 3 days before the first blizzard, the elderly couple had nowhere to go except a forgotten cabin deep in the Montana wilderness that hadn't been opened in 40 years. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning Liza turned 67, she woke before dawn like she had every day for the past 50 years. The farmhouse was quiet except for the old furnace clicking on, pushing warm air through vents that rattled like loose teeth. She sat at the edge of the bed, her joints stiff, her hands scarred from decades of work. Beside her, Jay slept with his mouth slightly open, his silver hair catching the pale light filtering through the curtains. He was 70 now, his body marked by years of hard labor and one terrible accident that left him with a limp he'd carried for 33 years. Liza didn't wake him. Instead, she shuffled to the kitchen, her slippers worn thin, and started the coffee. The smell filled the small house, mixing with the scent of wood smoke from last night's fire. Through the window above the sink, she could see their land stretching out toward the mountains. 160 acres of Montana earth they'd bought with borrowed money in 1976. They'd raised cattle, grown hay, fixed fences until their backs screamed. Every inch of this place was soaked in sweat and sacrifice, and it was all they had. She poured 2 cups of coffee, black for Jay, a little cream for herself. She heard his footsteps uneven, favoring his left leg as always. He appeared in the doorway wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn yesterday and probably the day before that. His face was weathered, kind, tired. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." They sat at the table, the same one they'd eaten at for 40 years. The wood was scratched and stained, one leg slightly shorter than the others. They'd never bothered to fix it. There were always more important things. "Derek's coming by this morning," Jay said, staring into his cup. Liza nodded. She already knew. Their son had called 2 days ago, said he needed to talk about something important. She'd heard something in his voice that made her stomach tighten. He hadn't visited in 6 months, hadn't called on Christmas, hadn't even sent a card. "Maybe he's bringing the grandkids," Liza offered, though she didn't believe it. Jay didn't respond. He just sipped his coffee and watched the sun crawl over the ridge. By 10 in the morning, a black Escalade rolled up the gravel driveway. It was new, shiny, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong on a dirt road. Liza and Jay stood on the porch, waiting. The air was cold, sharp, the kind of cold that warned of snow. The weatherman had been talking about a blizzard for days. 3 days out, maybe less. The first big storm of the season. Derek stepped out of the driver's side. He was 42, tall, broad-shouldered like his father had been before the accident. But he wore a suit now, expensive, tailored. His hair was slicked back. He looked like a stranger. From the passenger side came Vanessa. She was 10 years younger than Derek, blonde, severe, wearing sunglasses even though the sky was grey. She didn't smile. She rarely did. "Mom, Dad," Derek said, walking toward them. His voice was flat, rehearsed. Liza's heart sank. They sat in the living room, the 4 of them. Vanessa perched on the edge of the couch like she might catch something from the fabric. Derek sat beside her, hands folded. Liza and Jay took the 2 armchairs across from them, the springs sagging beneath their weight. Derek cleared his throat. "I'm going to be direct," he said. "Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it's time to make some changes." Liza glanced at Jay. His jaw tightened. "What kind of changes?" Jay asked. Derek pulled out a folder from his briefcase. He set it on the coffee table between them. Inside were papers, legal documents dense with words Liza couldn't follow. "This property," Derek began, "has a lot of potential. Development potential. There's a buyer interested in turning it into a resort community. Luxury cabins, hiking trails, the whole thing. They're offering $3.2 million. Liza's breath caught. "We're not selling," Jay said immediately. "Dad," Derek said, leaning forward, You're 70 years old. Mom's 67. You can barely keep this place running. The fence on the south pasture is falling apart. The roof on the barn is caving in. You're struggling." "We're managing," Liza said quietly. Vanessa scoffed. "Barely." Derek shot her a look, then softened his tone. "Look, we're worried about you, both of you. This place is too much. You should be enjoying your retirement, not breaking your backs every day." "This is our home," Jay said, his voice rising. "We built this. We're not leaving." Derek's expression shifted. The kindness, fake as it was, drained away. "Then we need to talk about the reality of the situation," he said. "You're getting older. What happens when one of you falls? What happens when you can't work anymore? You have no savings, no plan." "We have this land," Liza said. "That's our plan." Vanessa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "Land doesn't pay medical bills. It doesn't put food on the table when you're too old to work." "We've survived this long," Jay said. Derek stood up, pacing now. His hands flexed at his sides. "Look, I didn't want to do this, but if you won't listen to reason, then you need to know something." "What?" Liza whispered. "This property was partially financed through loans I co-signed when I was 23. Technically, I have a legal claim to it." The room went cold. "That loan was paid off 15 years ago," Jay said, his voice shaking. "The original one?" "Yes," Derek said, "but you refinanced in 2008. I co-signed that one too. Remember?" Liza did remember. The bank had required it. They'd needed the money to replace the well pump, fix the tractor, survive another winter. Derek had just graduated law school. He'd said it was no problem, happy to help. Now he was using it against them. "I'm not trying to hurt you," Derek said, but his eyes said otherwise. "I'm trying to help. Sign over the property to me. I'll handle the sale. You'll get a portion of the proceeds, enough to live comfortably in a retirement home. You'll be taken care of." "We don't want a retirement home," Liza said, tears burning her eyes. "We want our home." Vanessa stood up, smoothing her skirt. "This is ridiculous. You're being stubborn and stupid. Derek is offering you a way out. Take it." Jay stood too, his bad leg almost giving out. He steadied himself on the armrest. "Get out." "Dad," Derek said, "get out of our house." Derek's face hardened. He grabbed the folder, shoved it back into his briefcase. "Fine, but you have 72 hours to reconsider. After that, I'm moving forward with legal action. And trust me, you don't want that." He walked toward the door. Vanessa followed, her heels clicking on the old wooden floor. Derek paused at the threshold, his back to them. "I didn't want it to be like this," he said quietly. "Then it shouldn't be," Liza said, her voice breaking. But he didn't turn around. He just walked out. The door slammed behind them. The Escalade roared to life and disappeared down the driveway. Liza and Jay stood in the living room, silent, shaking. Outside, the wind picked up. The first snow began to fall. That night, neither of them slept. They sat at the kitchen table, the papers Derek had left spread out before them. Jay tried to read through them, but the legal language was dense, impossible. Liza stared out the window at the falling snow, her mind spinning. "He's really doing this," she whispered. Jay said nothing. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "We could fight it," Liza said. "Get a lawyer." "With what money?" Jay asked. Silence. "We could sell," Liza said, hating the words even as they left her mouth. Jay looked at her, his eyes wet. "And go where?" Liza didn't have an answer. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Derek. He didn't ask how they were. He just said the offer stood for 72 hours. Then he hung up. The day after that, a letter arrived. Legal notice. Eviction proceedings would begin if they didn't comply. Liza read it 3 times before it sank in. Her son, the boy she'd rocked to sleep, the child she'd sacrificed everything for, was evicting them. She walked outside into the cold. Snow blanketed the fields. The sky was grey, heavy with more to come. The blizzard was 36 hours away now. Everyone in town was preparing, stocking up, boarding windows. She stood in the middle of the yard and screamed. The sound tore from her throat, raw and broken. It echoed across the empty land and disappeared into the wind. That evening, Jay found her sitting on the porch steps, her face red from cold and crying. "We have to leave," he said gently. She looked up at him. "Where?" He sat beside her, groaning as his bad leg bent. "I don't know. A motel, maybe. Until we figure this out." Liza shook her head. "We can't afford that. Not for long." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Then Liza remembered. "My father's cabin," she said suddenly. Jay turned to her. "What?" She stood up, her heart racing. "My father. He had a hunting cabin, up near Glacier Park. I haven't been there since I was 27. Since before he died." Jay frowned. "That was 40 years ago, Liza. It's probably fallen apart." "Maybe," she said, "but maybe not. It's remote. No one goes up there. It's ours. Legally. He left it to me in his will." Jay stared at her. "You want to go there? In the middle of winter? With a blizzard coming?" Liza looked back at the farmhouse, the only home she'd known for decades. Then she looked at Jay. "What choice do we have?" They spent the next day packing. They couldn't take much. Jay's old pickup truck could only carry so much, and the road to the cabin, if it still existed, would be rough. They packed clothes, blankets, canned food, matches, candles, a first aid kit, tools. Liza found her father's old rifle in the basement, wrapped in an oiled cloth. She packed that too. By noon, the truck was loaded. They stood in the driveway looking back at the house. The windows were dark, the curtains pulled shut. It looked abandoned already. Liza climbed into the passenger seat. Jay slid behind the wheel. The engine coughed twice before turning over. They didn't look back as they drove away. The drive took 6 hours. The roads grew narrower, rougher. Pavement turned to gravel, gravel to dirt. Snow fell heavier as they climbed into the mountains. The truck's heater rattled but barely worked. Liza wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and watched the trees thicken on either side. "Do you remember how to get there?" Jay asked, squinting through the windshield. Liza nodded. "I think so. There's a turnoff near mile marker 47, then a logging road, then a trail." Jay didn't ask what they'd do if the trail was gone. They passed through a small town, barely more than a gas station and a post office. Liza wanted to stop, to stock up on more supplies, but they didn't have the money. They kept driving. The turnoff appeared just as the sun began to set. Liza pointed, and Jay turned the truck onto a narrow logging road. The snow was deeper here, untouched. The truck's tires spun, caught, pushed forward. They drove for another 30 minutes before the road ended. A wall of trees blocked the way. "This is it," Liza said. "We walk from here." Jay turned off the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No birds, no wind, just the soft hiss of snow falling. They climbed out. The cold hit like a slap. Liza pulled on her father's old hunting coat, heavy wool that smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. Jay grabbed the 2 largest duffel bags. Liza took a backpack and the rifle. The trail, if it could still be called that, was barely visible. Overgrown, choked with brush and fallen branches. They walked slowly, Jay limping heavily. The snow was mid-calf now, soaking through their boots. "How much farther?" Jay asked after 20 minutes. Liza wasn't sure. In her memory, the cabin had been close, but she'd been young then, strong. Everything seemed closer when you were young. They walked for another hour. The light faded. Liza pulled out a flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. Her breath came in short gasps. Her legs burned. Then she saw it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, half buried in snow and shadow. The roof sagged in the middle. The windows were boarded with old planks. Vines and moss covered the walls. It looked like something from a forgotten dream. "Oh God," Jay whispered. Liza walked toward it, her boots crunching through the snow. The front door was frozen shut, ice sealing it to the frame. She pushed. Nothing. "Jay!" she called. He came over, set down the bags, and pulled out a small axe they'd packed. He swung it once, twice, chipping away the ice. On the third swing, the door groaned and gave way. They stepped inside. The smell hit first: mildew, rot, animal droppings. The floor was covered in leaves and debris. A family of mice scattered at the intrusion. The ceiling had a hole in one corner, snow drifting through. The furniture, what little remained, was covered in dust and cobwebs. Liza stood in the center of the room, her heart sinking. "This was a mistake," Jay said quietly. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. He was right. This place was barely standing. They had no heat, no power, no running water. The blizzard was less than 24 hours away, but they had nowhere else to go. Liza set down her pack and rolled up her sleeves. "We make it work," she said. Jay looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Liza, this place is falling apart." "Then we put it back together," she said firmly. "We've done harder things." Jay stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. They worked through the night. Jay used the axe to clear debris while Liza swept the floor with a makeshift broom of pine branches. They found old furniture buried under tarps, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a sagging bed frame with a stained mattress they dragged outside. The stone fireplace was intact, the chimney clear. Jay built a fire using dried wood from a pile stacked against the back wall. It took 3 tries, but eventually flames caught. Warmth spread through the cabin, small but real. Liza found a bucket and ventured outside to the old well. She prayed it still worked. The wooden cover was frozen, but she pried it open. She lowered the bucket. It hit water. She pulled it up, the rope burning her hands, and carried it back inside. They boiled the water over the fire and drank it from tin cups they'd packed. It tasted metallic, but it was clean. By 3 in the morning, they'd done what they could. The cabin was still cold, still broken, but it was survivable. They unrolled their sleeping bags near the fire and lay down, fully clothed, exhausted beyond words. Liza stared at the ceiling, at the hole where snow drifted through. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" Jay asked. "For this. For getting us into this mess." Jay reached over and took her hand. His skin was rough, calloused, warm. "You didn't get us into anything," he said. "Our son did. This isn't your fault." Liza's eyes burned with tears. She turned toward him. "We raised him, Jay. We gave him everything. How did he turn into this?" Jay didn't have an answer. He just held her hand tighter. Outside, the wind began to howl. The blizzard hit at dawn. Liza woke to the sound of it, a roar like a freight train bearing down on the cabin. She sat up, disoriented, her body stiff from the cold and the hard floor. The fire had died to embers. She fed it more wood, blowing gently until flames rekindled. Jay woke beside her, groaning as he stretched. His leg was worse in the cold. She could see the pain in his face. "How bad is it?" she asked. He forced a smile. "I've had worse." She didn't believe him, but she didn't push. They ate a cold breakfast of canned beans and stale crackers. Outside, the snow fell so thick they couldn't see more than 5 feet. The wind battered the cabin walls, rattling the boarded windows. Liza prayed the roof would hold. They spent the day reinforcing what they could. Jay nailed loose boards tighter. Liza stuffed gaps in the walls with old rags and moss. They melted snow for drinking water. They rationed their food carefully. If the storm lasted more than a few days, they'd be in trouble. By evening, the temperature inside the cabin had dropped despite the fire. They huddled together under every blanket they had, their breath visible in the air. Liza's mind drifted to Derek. She wondered if he even knew where they were. She wondered if he cared. Probably not. He'd made his choice. He'd chosen money, Vanessa, a life that didn't include them. The grief hit her like a wave. She pressed her face into Jay's shoulder and wept. He held her, his own tears falling silent into her hair. "We're going to be okay," he whispered, though neither of them knew if it was true. The blizzard raged for 3 days. By the second day, they'd run out of dry wood and had to venture outside to get more from the pile. The snow was waist-deep. The wind nearly knocked Liza over. Jay tied a rope around her waist and anchored it to the door so she wouldn't get lost in the whiteout. She grabbed as much wood as she could carry and stumbled back inside, half frozen. On the third day, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The snow stopped. The silence that followed was eerie, oppressive. Liza opened the door and stepped outside. The world was white, buried, transformed. The truck was completely covered. The trail they'd walked in on was gone, erased. They were stranded. She turned back to Jay, who stood in the doorway, pale and shivering. "We're stuck here until spring," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then we survive until spring." That afternoon, while Jay rested by the fire, Liza explored the cabin more thoroughly. She found old hunting gear in a corner, traps, fishing line, a bow with no string. She found her father's old trunk, buried under a pile of rotted canvas. Her heart ached at the sight of it. She ran her fingers over the brass latch, the wood worn smooth by time. She opened it carefully. Inside were clothes, moth-eaten and useless, a pair of boots cracked and dry, maps yellowed and brittle, and at the bottom a stack of leather-bound journals. She pulled one out and opened it. Her father's handwriting, small and precise, filled the pages. January 5th, 1973. Another cold winter. The deer are scarce this year. I think I'll spend more time at the cabin come spring. Need to reinforce the chimney. She flipped through more pages, mundane entries about weather, hunting, repairs. Then, near the middle, the tone changed. June 12, 1978. The collection is nearly complete. I've spent 30 years gathering these pieces, protecting them from those who would destroy or exploit them. This cabin, remote and forgotten, is the perfect place. No one will think to look here. No one will find them unless I want them found. Liza frowned. Collection? What collection? She kept reading. August 3rd, 1979. I've built the vault. It's hidden beneath the floorboards in the northeast corner. The space is climate-controlled naturally by the earth, perfect for preservation. I've wrapped each piece carefully. They'll be safe here, safer than anywhere else. Her heart began to race. October 9th, 1981. Sometimes I wonder if I should have revealed them, donated them to a museum perhaps, but I don't trust institutions. They're too political, too corrupt. These pieces deserve better. Liza will understand one day. When she's ready. When the time is right. Liza's hands shook. She flipped to the last page. March 17th, 1982. The collection is complete. 34 pieces in total. Estimated value $47 million. But their worth isn't measured in money. It's measured in what they represent. Beauty, history, survival. I've hidden them where winter protects them. For Liza when she's ready. Liza stared at the page, her mind reeling. 47 million. 34 pieces. What was her father talking about? She stood up, the journal clutched in her hands, and looked around the cabin. Northeast corner, he'd written. She walked to the corner where the bed frame had been. The floorboards looked ordinary, worn, dusty, but when she knelt down and pressed on one, it shifted slightly. "Jay," she called, her voice shaking. "What?" he asked from the fire. "Come here, now." He limped over, confused. "What is it?" She handed him the journal, pointed to the entry. "Read this." He read it, his eyes widening. "Liza, what is this?" "I don't know," she said, "but I think we're about to find out." They stared at the floorboard for a long moment, neither of them moving. The cabin was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft whistle of wind through gaps in the walls. Outside, the world was buried in white, frozen and still. Jay knelt beside Liza, his bad leg protesting. He pressed his palm against the board she'd touched. It shifted just slightly, like it had been designed to move. "Help me," he said. Together they pried at the edges. The wood was old but solid, and after a few moments of effort, it came loose. Beneath it was another board, then another. They pulled them up one by one, revealing a dark square opening about 3 feet wide. Liza grabbed the flashlight and shone it down. Wooden rungs descended into blackness, like a ladder built into the earth itself. Her heart hammered in her chest. "You're not going down there," Jay said immediately. "We both are," Liza replied. She didn't wait for him to argue. She swung her legs over the edge, found the first rung with her boot, and began to climb down. The wood creaked under her weight but held. Jay followed, slower, careful with his bad leg. The descent was longer than Liza expected. 10 rungs, then 15, then 20. The air grew colder, damper. The smell of earth surrounded them. Finally, her boots hit solid ground. She swept the flashlight around and gasped. They were standing in a chamber carved out of rock and packed earth. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet high, supported by thick wooden beams. The space stretched out before them, roughly 20 feet wide and 30 feet long. The walls were smooth, reinforced with stone, and everywhere, lining the walls and stacked carefully in the center, were shapes covered in thick canvas and sealed plastic. "What is this?" Jay whispered, his voice echoing softly. Liza walked toward the nearest shape. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the canvas. Beneath it was a wooden crate, professionally built, with brass hinges. She unlatched it and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth and sealed in a clear protective sleeve, was a painting. Even in the dim light of the flashlight, she could see it was extraordinary. A landscape, rolling hills beneath a sky streaked with gold and crimson. The brushwork was visible, thick and deliberate. In the corner, a signature she didn't recognize but knew was important. She turned to Jay, who had uncovered another crate. Inside was a portrait, a woman in a blue dress, her expression serene and timeless. They moved through the chamber, unwrapping piece after piece, each one more stunning than the last. Abstract works with bold colors and geometric shapes. Still lifes of fruit and flowers so realistic they seemed ready to rot. Portraits of people long dead, their eyes following the light. Liza stopped in front of a painting of a water scene, lily pads floating on a pond, the colors soft and dreamlike. She'd seen this image before in books, in museums. Her breath caught. "Jay," she whispered, "I think this is a Monet." He turned to her, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "What?" She pointed to the small brass plaque attached to the crate. It read, "Claude Monet, Water Lilies, 1899. Provenance, Private Collection, Paris. Acquired 1943. They stared at each other in the suffocating silence. "This can't be real," Jay said. But it was. They could see it. They could touch it. Liza moved to another crate and found a tag. Pablo Picasso, Woman with a Hat, 1935. Provenance, Estate Sale, Barcelona. Acquired 1944. Another, Rembrandt van Rijn, Portrait of a Man, 1652. Provenance, Museum Transfer, Amsterdam. Acquired 1945. She felt dizzy, unsteady. She leaned against one of the wooden beams and tried to breathe. Jay was already digging through another stack. He pulled out a metal box, smaller than the others, sealed with a rusted padlock. He smashed it open with the handle of the flashlight. Inside was a leather ledger, thick and heavy. He opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed but intact. Her father's handwriting filled every line. Liza leaned over his shoulder, reading by flashlight. The first entry was dated March 5, 1943. "Today I left Paris. The Germans are closing in. I managed to save 12 pieces from the museum before they could be confiscated or destroyed. I don't know where I'll take them, but I know I can't let them fall into the wrong hands. These aren't just paintings, they're history. They're humanity." Lisa's throat tightened. Her father had been a curator. She knew that. He'd worked in Europe before the war, but she'd never known the details. He never spoke about it. She flipped forward. Entry after entry documented acquisitions, some from estates being liquidated during the war, some from private collectors fleeing persecution, some from museums transferring pieces to protect them from bombing or theft. August 12, 1945. The war is over. I have 29 pieces now. I've brought them to America. No one knows. I've told no one. If the authorities find out, they'll seize them. They'll say I stole them. But I didn't. I saved them. November 3rd, 1951. I've found the perfect place. A cabin in Montana, remote, forgotten. I've built a vault beneath the floor. The earth will protect them. The cold will preserve them. No one will find them unless I want them found. December 19th, 1967. Liza came to the cabin with me today. She's 27 now, a mother herself. She asked about the trunk, about what I keep locked away. I told her it was just old papers. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. She has her own life, her own struggles. This burden isn't hers. Not yet. Tears blurred Liza's vision. Jay turned to the final pages. One entry stood out, written in shaky handwriting. March 17th, 1982. I'm 79 now. My hands shake. My memory fades. I know I don't have much time left. The collection is complete. 34 pieces. I've documented everything. Authentication papers, provenance records, all sealed in waterproof cases. Total estimated value as of today, $47 million. But their worth isn't measured in money. It's measured in what they represent. Beauty, history, survival. I've hidden them where winter protects them. For Liza. When she's ready, she'll understand. She'll know what to do. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, my dear girl, but some secrets are too heavy to carry until you're strong enough. I love you. Always. Your father, Samuel Whitmore. Liza's legs gave out. She sank to the ground, her back against the cold stone wall. Jay sat beside her, the ledger open in his lap. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Jay whispered, 47 million. In 1982. Liza nodded, unable to form words. That was over 40 years ago, he continued. These paintings, if they're real, if they're authenticated, they could be worth. He trailed off, unable to finish. Hundreds of millions, Liza whispered. The weight of it crushed her. She thought of the farmhouse they'd just lost, the 160 acres they'd worked themselves into the ground for. All of it worth maybe 3 million. And here, beneath a rotting cabin in the middle of nowhere, her father had hidden a fortune worth 100 times that. Why? She asked aloud, though her father couldn't answer. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he use this to help us? Jay put his arm around her. Maybe he was protecting it, protecting you. From what? From people like Derek, Jay said quietly. From people who would exploit it, take it, ruin it. Liza closed her eyes. She thought of her son, of the way he'd looked at her with cold calculation when he demanded she sign over the farm. She thought of Vanessa, her greedy eyes, her sharp voice. Jay was right. If her father had revealed this collection, it would have been taken, fought over, destroyed in legal battles and family feuds. So he buried it, kept it secret, waited for a moment that never came. Until now. They climbed back up the ladder slowly, carefully, and replaced the floorboards. Upstairs, the fire had died to embers again. Liza rebuilt it, her hands moving automatically while her mind spun. Jay sat at the small table, the ledger open in front of him. He flipped through pages, studying the entries, the dates, the names. Your father was meticulous, he said. Every piece is documented. Where it came from, when he acquired it, why. There are notes about authenticity, about preservation techniques. He even recorded temperature and humidity levels in the vault. Liza poured water into a pot and set it over the fire to boil. They were almost out of tea, but she needed something warm, something to ground her. "What do we do?" she asked. Jay looked up at her. "I don't know." Outside, the wind picked up again. Another storm was coming. They could feel it in the air, in the way the cabin groaned and settled. That night, they lay by the fire, wrapped in blankets, staring at the ceiling. Neither could sleep. Liza's mind raced through possibilities, through fears, through a lifetime of what-ifs. She thought about her father. She'd always known him as a quiet man, gentle, thoughtful. He'd taught her to fish, to read the weather, to survive in the wilderness. But she'd never known this side of him. The curator, the protector, the man who risked everything to save pieces of history. She thought about Derek, the boy who used to climb into her lap and beg for bedtime stories, the teenager who stayed up late helping Jay mend fences, the young man who hugged her tight before leaving for college, promising he'd never forget where he came from. "What happened to him?" she whispered into the darkness. Jay didn't answer. Maybe he didn't know either. The next morning they woke to a world transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape so white and bright it hurt to look at. The sun emerged for the first time in days, turning the snow into a field of diamonds. Liza stepped outside, her breath fogging in the frozen air. The cold bit at her face, but she didn't care. She walked to the edge of the clearing and looked out at the mountains, jagged and eternal against the blue sky. They were alive. Against all odds, they'd survived. Jay joined her, limping through the deep snow. His face was drawn, pale. The cold was hard on his bad leg. "We need food," he said simply. Liza nodded. They'd been rationing their supplies carefully, but they were running low. Another week, maybe 2 if they stretched it, and they'd be in real trouble. "I'll set snares," Jay said. "There are rabbit tracks near the tree line." "I'll check the well," Liza added. "Make sure it's still clear." They spent the day working. Jay fashioned snares from wire he'd found in the cabin, using techniques he'd learned as a boy growing up in rural Wyoming. He placed them carefully around the clearing, near trails where animals might pass. Liza cleared snow from the well and tested the water. It was cold, clean, perfect. She thanked God for small mercies. That afternoon, while Jay rested his leg by the fire, Liza returned to the trunk. She pulled out the journals again and began reading more carefully, looking for clues, for context, for understanding. She learned that her father had been born in New York in 1903. He'd studied art history at Columbia, then moved to Paris in 1928 to work at a small museum. He'd fallen in love with the city, with the art, with a woman named Marguerite who died in 1937 of tuberculosis. Heartbroken, he threw himself into his work. When the war came, he stayed, helping to evacuate artwork from museums and private collections before the Nazis could seize them. He saved pieces that would have been destroyed, labeled as degenerate or confiscated for private collections. After the war, he couldn't return them. Some of the original owners were dead. Some of the museums had been destroyed. The paperwork was tangled. The politics impossible. So he kept them, protecting them, waiting for a time when the world was stable enough to receive them. But that time never came. He immigrated to America in 1946, settled in Montana, married Liza's mother, a schoolteacher named Ellen, in 1947. Liza was born in 1949. Her mother died when she was 12. After that, it was just her and her father, and the cabin, and the secret. Liza closed the journal and stared into the fire. She understood now. Her father hadn't been hiding treasure. He'd been protecting history. He'd been a guardian. And now, so was she. That evening they ate a thin soup made from canned vegetables and melted snow. It wasn't much, but it was warm. As they ate, Jay asked the question they'd both been avoiding. "What do we do with it?" Liza set down her spoon. "I don't know." "We could sell it," he said carefully. "One piece, just one. It would be enough to live on for the rest of our lives. Liza shook her head. My father didn't want them sold. He wanted them protected. Then we protect them, Jay said. But how? We're stuck in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We have no money, no resources, no way to contact anyone. Spring, Liza said. When the snow melts, we'll figure it out. And until then, we survive. The days blurred together. They fell into a rhythm. Wake before dawn. Rebuild the fire. Melt snow for water. Eat sparingly. Work on the cabin. Reinforcing walls. Patching holes. Making it livable. Check the snares. Sleep by the fire. Repeat. Jay caught 2 rabbits in the first week. They cooked them slowly over the fire, making the meat last as long as possible. Liza found wild onions buried under the snow near the tree line. They weren't much, but they added flavor to the soup. At night, they talked. Not about the paintings, not about Derek, but about the past, about better times. Liza told Jay about the day they met. She'd been 21, working at a diner in Billings, trying to save money for community college. He'd come in during a snowstorm, soaking wet, asking for coffee and directions. His truck had broken down on the highway. She'd offered to help fix it. She was good with engines even then. They'd worked on that truck for 3 hours in the freezing cold. When it finally started, he'd asked her to dinner. She'd said yes. They were married 6 months later, 1970. Jay talked about the farm, how they'd bought it with a loan from the bank and sweat equity, how they'd built the barn themselves, board by board, how Liza had insisted on planting a garden every spring, even when money was tight, because she said a home needed flowers as much as it needed food. He talked about Derek, how he'd been born in 1972 on a cold November morning, how Jay had held him for the first time and cried, not from sadness, but from overwhelming love. How had it all gone so wrong? The accident happened when Derek was 9, 1981. Jay had been working construction to make extra money. A scaffold collapsed. He fell 20 feet, shattered his left leg. The surgeries helped, but he was never the same. He couldn't do heavy labor anymore. They almost lost the farm, but they didn't. They fought, they adapted. Liza took on more work, fixing engines, doing repairs for neighbors. Derek helped too, even as a kid. He'd feed the animals, mend fences, never complained. He was a good boy, Liza said softly. He was, Jay agreed. So when did he change? Jay thought for a long time before answering. I think it was when he went to college. He met people with money, people who'd never struggled, and he started to see us differently, like we were something to be embarrassed about. Liza nodded. She'd felt it too. The way Derek stopped bringing friends home. The way he'd tense when they visited him in the city. The way he introduced them simply as my parents, never with pride, always with hesitation. And then Vanessa came along. They'd met her once before the wedding. She'd been polite but distant. She didn't understand farms or hard work or people who lived paycheck to paycheck. To her, Derek's parents were relics from a life he should have left behind. And Derek let her think that. Liza stared into the fire, tears slipping down her cheeks. Where did we go wrong? Jay took her hand. We didn't. He did. 2 weeks passed, then 3. They survived on rabbits, canned food, and stubborn determination. The cabin, slowly, became something close to a home. They patched the roof, cleared out the debris, even found some old blankets in a forgotten closet that, once washed and dried by the fire, were usable. One afternoon, while Jay was outside checking snares, Liza returned to the vault. She climbed down carefully, flashlight in hand, and stood among the paintings. She walked slowly through the rows, studying each one. These weren't just valuable. They were beautiful. Each piece told a story, captured a moment, preserved something that might have been lost forever. She stopped in front of a painting of a young girl holding a flower. The style was impressionistic, soft and light. The girl's expression was one of pure joy. Liza stared at it for a long time. Her father had saved this, had risked his life, his freedom, his future to protect it. Not for money, not for fame, but because he believed it mattered. And maybe it did. Maybe beauty was worth protecting. Maybe history was worth fighting for. Maybe some things were more important than survival. She climbed back up and found Jay by the fire. He looked exhausted, his face drawn. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just tired." She sat beside him and took his hand. "I've been thinking about what my father wrote, about protecting these pieces, about making sure they're used wisely." Jay looked at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we don't sell them. We don't hide them. We share them. With the world. The right way." "How?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we'll figure it out, together." Jay smiled faintly. "You sound like your father." She smiled back. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." That night, they pulled out the ledger again and studied it by firelight. Her father had included detailed provenance for every piece. Acquisition dates, previous owners, historical significance. He'd also included authentication documents, sealed in waterproof cases, tucked into each crate. "If these are real," Jay said slowly, "and if we can prove they're real, this collection is worth more than we can imagine." "How much more?" He did some rough math in his head, based on auction records he vaguely remembered from years ago. If that Monet alone is authentic, it could be worth 20 million or more. The Rembrandt, maybe 30. The Picasso, another 15. Multiply that across 34 pieces. Liza felt the weight of it settle over her like a heavy blanket. 290 million, she whispered. "Maybe more," Jay said. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Finally, Liza spoke. "We protect them, like my father did, and when spring comes we find someone who can help us do this right." Jay nodded. "And until then?" "Until then," she said, "we survive, like we always have." The next morning, Liza woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. They were trapped in a frozen wilderness, yes. They were running low on supplies, yes. But they had something now. Not just valuable paintings. They had a mission. She spent the day organizing. She catalogued every piece in the vault, cross-referencing it with her father's ledger. She checked the condition of each painting, made notes on what might need conservation work. She handled them carefully, reverently. Jay watched her from the top of the ladder. "You look like him," he said. "Who?" "Your father. The way you're looking at those paintings, the way you're touching them, like they're sacred." Liza paused. "Maybe they are." That evening, they allowed themselves a small celebration. Jay had caught another rabbit, and Liza had found a can of peaches they'd forgotten about. They cooked the rabbit with wild onions and ate the peaches for dessert. It was the best meal they'd had in weeks. As they ate, they talked about the future, about what they'd do when spring came, about how they'd get the paintings authenticated, how they'd decide what to do with them. "We could donate them to museums," Liza said. "Let people see them, let them be studied and appreciated." Jay nodded. "Your father would like that." "Or we could create our own foundation," she continued. "Something that honors his memory, something that helps preserve art and history." The possibilities felt endless. For the first time since leaving the farm, Liza felt something other than grief and fear. She felt hope. Later, as they lay by the fire, Liza turned to Jay. "Thank you." "For what?" "For believing in me, for staying, for not giving up." He kissed her forehead. "We're in this together, always have been." She closed her eyes and listened to the fire, to the wind outside, to the steady rhythm of Jay's breathing. They'd lost everything, their home, their son, their security. But somehow, in this frozen cabin at the edge of the world, they'd found something new. Not just fortune, not just legacy. They'd found purpose, and sometimes that was worth more than anything. The fourth week arrived with bitter cold and endless silence. Liza and Jay had settled into a routine that felt almost normal, if normal meant living in a cabin with no electricity, no running water, and a fortune worth hundreds of millions buried beneath your feet. They woke each morning before dawn. Jay would rebuild the fire while Liza melted snow for water. They'd eat a sparse breakfast, usually oatmeal made from their dwindling supplies or dried meat from rabbits Jay had snared. Then they'd work. Jay would check the snares, gather firewood, reinforce whatever part of the cabin seemed most likely to fail next. Liza would study the journals, memorizing every detail, every entry, every piece of her father's careful documentation. But beneath the routine, tension simmered. They hadn't spoken about what would happen when spring came, about who they could trust, about whether revealing the collection would bring salvation or destruction. One afternoon, while Jay was outside clearing snow from the roof, Liza descended into the vault again. She'd been doing this more frequently, drawn to the paintings like they held answers she couldn't quite articulate. She walked among them slowly, her flashlight casting long shadows across the wrapped canvases. She stopped in front of the Monet, the water lilies floating in their eternal pond. She studied the brushstrokes, the way the colors blended and separated, creating depth and light. It was hypnotic, peaceful. Her father had saved this, had carried it across an ocean, hidden it for decades, protected it from those who would exploit or destroy it. But why? She thought she understood. Beauty was rare. In a world that seemed determined to tear itself apart, to destroy everything precious and meaningful, beauty was an act of resistance. Preserving it was an act of faith. She heard footsteps above. Jay's voice called down through the opening. "Liza, you down there?" "Yeah," she called back. "Come up, quick." Something in his tone made her heart skip. She climbed the ladder fast, emerging into the main room. Jay stood by the boarded window, peering through a gap between the planks. "What is it?" she asked. He pointed. "Listen." She stood still, holding her breath. At first, she heard nothing but wind. Then, faint but growing louder, a sound that didn't belong. A mechanical hum, rhythmic, pulsing. "Helicopter," Jay whispered. Liza's blood turned cold. Who would be flying out here? They stood frozen as the sound grew closer, louder, until it was directly overhead. The cabin shook slightly. Snow fell from the roof in heavy clumps. Then the sound began to fade, moving past them, circling. "They're looking for something," Jay said. "Or someone," Liza added. The helicopter circled twice more, then the sound changed. It was landing, not far away. Maybe a quarter mile. Liza and Jay looked at each other, panic rising. "Who knows we're here?" Jay asked. "No one," Liza said. "Unless," she trailed off. "Unless what?" "Unless Derek told someone." They moved away from the window, their minds racing. If it was search and rescue, that meant Derek had reported them missing. Which meant he'd been looking for them. Which meant he knew about the cabin, or at least knew enough to point searchers in this direction. "We should have expected this," Jay said, running his hand through his silver hair. "He's our son. He'd look for us eventually." Liza nodded, but her stomach churned. If Derek found them, if he saw the cabin, saw that they were surviving, saw that there was more here than just an old hunting shack, would he leave it alone? And if Vanessa was with him, would she? They heard voices, distant but approaching, men calling out, searching. Liza made a decision. She hurried to the corner where they'd uncovered the vault and quickly replaced the floorboards. She kicked debris over them, shoved the old bed frame back into position, made it look undisturbed. Jay understood immediately. He grabbed the journals from the table and shoved them back into the trunk, covering them with old blankets and clothes. By the time the first knock came at the door, everything looked as it had before. Just an old cabin barely standing, occupied by two elderly people surviving against the odds. Jay opened the door. 3 men stood outside in bright orange search and rescue gear. Behind them, maybe 50 feet back, stood Derek. He wore an expensive winter coat, his face pale and drawn. Beside him, looking irritated and cold, was Vanessa. "Mr. Harrington?" one of the rescue workers asked. Jay nodded. "Your son reported you and your wife missing. We've been searching for 3 days. Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Jay said carefully. The man looked past him into the cabin. "May we come in? Just to check you both over? Make sure you're not injured or hypothermic." Jay stepped aside. The 3 men entered, their boots tracking snow across the floor. Liza stood by the fire, arms crossed, watching them with guarded eyes. Derek pushed past them. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Liza didn't move, didn't speak. Derek's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I didn't know where you went. I thought you might have." He couldn't finish. Tears ran down his face. One of the rescue workers, a woman with kind eyes, approached Liza. "Mom, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "No," Liza said quietly. "We're managing." The woman glanced around the cabin, taking in the fire, the neatly stacked supplies, the reinforced walls. "You've done well," she said with genuine admiration. "Most people wouldn't last a week out here." "We're not most people," Liza replied. The team did a quick medical check. Blood pressure slightly elevated but stable. No signs of frostbite or hypothermia. Minor malnutrition but nothing critical. They were shocked at how well the elderly couple had survived. Derek stood near the door, unable to stop crying. Vanessa remained outside, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. After the team finished their assessment, the lead rescuer turned to Jay. "We can evacuate you both. We have a helicopter waiting. You'll be warm and safe within the hour." "We're not leaving," Liza said firmly. Everyone turned to her. "Mom," the rescuer said gently, "with all due respect, it's 20 degrees below zero out here. You have limited supplies. Another storm is coming in 2 days." "We'll manage," Liza repeated. "Mum, please," Derek said, stepping forward. "Come back with us. Come home. I'll fix everything. I'll cancel the sale. You can have the farm back. Just please come with me." Liza looked at him for a long moment. "Home," she said quietly. "You threw us out, Derek. You called us stubborn and stupid. You threatened us with legal action. And now you want us to come home." Derek flinched like she'd slapped him. "I was wrong," he said. "I know I was wrong. Vanessa, he hesitated. "She made me see things differently, made me think you were holding me back. But I was terrified when I couldn't find you. I thought I'd lost you." "You did lose us," Liza said, "the moment you chose her over us." Derek's face went pale. Vanessa, apparently tired of waiting outside, stepped into the doorway. "Oh, for God's sake," she said, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. You're both fine. You've proven you can survive in the wilderness. Congratulations. Now let's go home before we all freeze to death." Liza turned to her slowly. "This isn't your conversation." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Derek is my husband. His family is my concern. You made it very clear we weren't your concern," Liza said. "You made it very clear we were embarrassing. An inconvenience. Trash to be discarded." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but Derek cut her off. "She's right," he said quietly. Vanessa whipped around. "Excuse me?" Derek looked at her, and for the first time, Liza saw something in her son's eyes she hadn't seen in years. Clarity. He turned back to Liza and Jay. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know I hurt you both in ways I can't take back. But I'm asking. I'm begging. Give me a chance to make this right." The rescue team stood awkwardly in the small space, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding. The lead rescuer cleared his throat. "Folks, we need to make a decision. We can't force you to evacuate if you're of sound mind and not in immediate danger. But we are leaving supplies. Food, medical kit, emergency beacon. If you change your mind or if things get bad, you activate that beacon and we'll come get you." Jay nodded. "Thank you." The team began unloading supplies from large backpacks: canned goods, dried fruit, protein bars, bottled water, first aid supplies, thermal blankets. They stacked everything neatly near the fire. Derek watched them work, then turned to Jay. "Dad, please, at least let me come back in a few weeks. Let me check on you." "We'll be fine," Jay said, his voice neutral. Derek's eyes drifted around the cabin. He noticed things: the clean floor, the organized supplies, the furniture that had been moved and rearranged. His gaze lingered on the corner where the vault entrance lay, hidden beneath the bed frame and debris. "What's under there?" he asked, pointing. Liza's heart stopped. Jay didn't miss a beat. "Your grandfather's old hunting gear, traps, some rifles, ammunition, nothing worth much." Derek stared at the corner for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push. Vanessa, however, had moved closer. Her sharp eyes scanned the cabin with an intensity that made Liza's skin crawl. She noticed everything: the moved furniture, the disturbed dust patterns, the way Liza and Jay positioned themselves between her and the corner. "There's something here," Vanessa said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Just an old cabin," Liza said evenly. Vanessa's gaze locked on her. "I don't think so." The tension in the room thickened. The rescue team sensed it and began moving toward the door. "We should go," the lead rescuer said. "Storm's coming in fast." Derek lingered. "Mom, Dad, I'll come back. In spring, when the snow melts. I promise." "And he swallowed hard. "I'm going to fix what I broke." Somehow, Liza didn't respond. She just watched as he turned and walked out. Vanessa followed, but not before casting one last suspicious glance around the cabin. The rescue team filed out, wishing them luck. The door closed. The sound of the helicopter starting up filled the air, then faded as it lifted off and disappeared over the mountains. Liza and Jay stood in the silence, their hearts pounding. "She knows," Liza whispered. "Maybe," Jay said, "but she doesn't know what." Liza walked to the window and watched through the gap as the helicopter became a speck on the horizon. "She knows there's something valuable here, and she won't let it go." Jay sank into a chair, his bad leg throbbing. "Then we have a bigger problem than we thought." That night, they couldn't sleep. They sat by the fire, the new supplies stacked beside them, and talked in low voices. "We can't tell Derek," Liza said. "Not yet. Not while he's still with her." "Agreed," Jay said. "But we can't keep this secret forever. Eventually the snow will melt. People will be able to get up here. If Derek comes back, if Vanessa pressures him, they'll search this place." Liza pulled out the journals again. She flipped through them, looking for answers her father might have left. She found an entry dated July 9th, 1979. "The authorities came asking about the collection today. I told them I knew nothing, that the pieces were lost during the war. They seemed satisfied, but I don't trust them. Governments are fickle. They care about control, not preservation. I will take this secret to my grave if I must. These pieces deserve better than bureaucracy and politics." Liza read it aloud to Jay. "He was scared," Jay said. "Scared someone would take them. And he was right to be," Liza said. "If the government finds out, they'll seize them, claim them as stolen property or national treasures. We'll have no say." "So what do we do?" Liza thought for a long time. "We need help, someone we can trust, someone who understands art and history and legal protections." "Who?" Liza didn't know. They had no connections in the art world, no lawyers they could afford, no one they could turn to without risking everything. She flipped through more journal entries, looking for clues. Her father had mentioned a few names over the years, colleagues from before the war, but they'd all be dead by now. Then she found something, an entry from 1976. "Met a young professor today at the university in Missoula. Elena Rostova. Brilliant mind. She's researching looted art from World War II, trying to trace pieces back to their rightful owners. She understands why preservation matters. I told her nothing, of course, but if I ever needed someone to trust, it might be her. She has integrity, rare in this field. Liza looked up at Jay. Elena Rostova. Who? A professor. My father met her. Thought she had integrity. That was almost 50 years ago, Jay said. She'd be, what, in her 70s now, if she's even still alive. It's a start, Liza said, but how do we contact her? We have no phone, no internet. We're stuck here until spring. Jay thought for a moment. The rescue team left an emergency beacon. It has a satellite connection. Maybe we could, he trailed off. Use it to make a call? Liza finished. It's risky, Jay said. It's meant for emergencies only. If we use it for anything else, people will ask questions. Liza nodded. Then we wait. We wait until spring. And then we find her. The days that followed were tense. Every sound made them jump. Every gust of wind sounded like a helicopter. They waited for Derek to return, for Vanessa to show up with lawyers or police, or whoever people like her brought when they wanted something. But no one came. The isolation, which had once felt protective, now felt suffocating. Liza found herself standing at the window for long stretches, watching the tree line, waiting for something that never arrived. Jay's leg worsened. The cold and the stress took their toll. He tried to hide it, but Liza saw the way he winced when he walked, the way he rubbed the old injury when he thought she wasn't looking. One night, while Jay slept fitfully by the fire, Liza descended into the vault alone. She sat among the paintings, her flashlight casting shadows across the wrapped canvases. She felt the weight of them, not their physical weight, but the weight of responsibility. Her father had protected these for decades, had sacrificed a normal life, wealth, recognition, all to keep them safe. And now that burden was hers. But was she strong enough to carry it? She thought about Derek, about the boy he'd been and the man he'd become, about the choices that had led him to that black Escalade, to Vanessa's cold eyes, to the moment he'd thrown his own parents out into the cold. Where had they gone wrong? She replayed memories like old films, birthdays, Christmases, quiet moments at the dinner table. She remembered teaching Derek to ride a bike, to bait a hook, to change a tire. She remembered his laughter, his curiosity, his kindness. That boy was still in there somewhere. She had to believe that. But Vanessa had changed him. Or maybe she'd just revealed what was already there, a hunger for more, a shame about where he came from, a willingness to sacrifice anything, even family, for status and wealth. Liza wiped tears from her cheeks. She stood and walked among the paintings again, studying each one. A Rembrandt portrait of an old man with weathered hands, a Picasso abstract of broken shapes and bold colors, a Van Gogh landscape of sunflowers burning gold against a blue sky. These pieces had survived wars, revolutions, the collapse of empires. They'd outlasted dictators and thieves and those who wanted to destroy them. They would outlast this too. Liza climbed back up the ladder and found Jay awake, staring into the fire. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head and sat beside him. "I keep thinking about what happens next." "Me too." She took his hand. "What if Derek tries to take them? What if he claims their family property? What if Vanessa convinces him to fight us in court?" Jay squeezed her hand. "Then we fight back." "With what? We have no money for lawyers." "We have proof," Jay said. "Your father documented everything. Every piece has provenance, authentication papers, legal records. If Derek tries to take them, we'll show the world what they really are. And we'll show what kind of man he's become." Liza leaned her head on his shoulder. "I don't want to fight our son." "I know," Jay said softly. "But if he forces us to, we will. And we'll win. Because we're not protecting these paintings for ourselves. We're protecting them for everyone. For history. For the future." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the fire burn low. Finally, Liza spoke. "My father wrote something in one of the journals. He said some secrets are too heavy to carry until you're strong enough." Jay nodded. "I think he was right. I think," Liza said slowly, "I'm finally strong enough." 3 more weeks passed. The cold deepened. The supplies from the rescue team helped, but they were still barely surviving. Jay caught fewer rabbits as the weather worsened. Liza rationed their food down to single meals per day, but they didn't give up. They reinforced the cabin further. They studied the journals. They planned for spring. One night, Liza had a dream. She was standing in a museum, bright and clean and full of people. The walls were hung with paintings, her father's collection, each one carefully lit and labeled. People moved through the space quietly, reverently, their faces filled with wonder. Her father stood beside her. He looked younger, healthier, the way she remembered him from childhood. He smiled. "You did it," he said. She woke with tears on her face. Jay was still asleep beside her, his breathing steady. The fire had burned down to embers. She rebuilt it carefully, adding wood piece by piece until flames caught and spread warmth through the cabin. She pulled out the ledger again and studied the final pages. Her father's last entry, written in shaky handwriting, repeated itself in her mind. "For Liza, when she's ready, she'll understand, she'll know what to do." She understood now. This wasn't about money or even about art. It was about legacy, about proving that beauty and history mattered more than profit, about standing up to those who would exploit or destroy what should be preserved. Her father had spent his life protecting these pieces from people who saw them only as commodities, and now she would continue that work. But she couldn't do it alone. When Jay woke, she told him her decision. "We need to reach out. We need to find this Elena Rostova or someone like her. Someone who can help us protect these pieces the right way." Jay nodded. "How?" "The emergency beacon," Liza said. "We use it. That's risky." "I know," she said, "but we're running out of time. Spring is coming. Derek will come back. Vanessa will push him to search this place. We need help before that happens." Jay thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it." They spent the next day crafting a message. They couldn't be too specific, couldn't risk revealing too much over an unsecured line, but they needed to convey enough to get help. Finally, they settled on something simple. Need to reach Professor Elena Rostova, University of Montana, Art History Department. Urgent matter regarding World War II-era art collection. Descendants of Samuel Whitmore. Liza activated the emergency beacon. The device beeped, then connected to a satellite network. She typed the message carefully, her hands shaking. Then she hit send. The beacon confirmed transmission. Message sent. Now they waited. 2 days later, the beacon received a reply. It was short, encrypted, professional. Message received and forwarded. Professor Rostova will respond within 48 hours. Maintain current position. Liza and Jay stared at the device in disbelief. "She's alive," Liza whispered. Jay let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "And she's responding." They spent the next 2 days in anxious anticipation. Every hour felt like a week. They checked the beacon constantly, waiting for another message. Finally, it came. Samuel Whitmore. I remember that name. I studied his work in graduate school. Everyone thought his collection was lost or sold. If you're his descendants and you have information about his pieces, I need to speak with you immediately. This is Professor Elena Rostova. Send coordinates. I will come to you. Liza's hands trembled as she read the message aloud. "Do we trust her?" Jay asked. Liza thought about her father's journal entry, about his belief that Elena had integrity. She thought about the desperate situation they were in. She thought about Derek and Vanessa and the ticking clock of spring thaw. "We don't have a choice," she said. She typed back their approximate coordinates and a brief description of the cabin's location. Then she added, "Come alone. Tell no one. She sent the message and waited. The reply came within minutes. Understood. I'll arrive in 7 to 10 days depending on weather. Bring authentication equipment and legal counsel. Do not open any sealed containers until I arrive. What you have may be more important than you realize. Liza and Jay looked at each other. More important than we realize, Jay repeated. What does that mean? Liza didn't know. But something in the professor's tone, even through the clinical text of an emergency message, felt urgent, felt monumental. They spent the next week preparing. They cleaned the cabin more thoroughly, organized the vault, made sure all the documentation was in order. They were careful, methodical, treating every piece like the treasure it was, and they waited for help, for spring, for whatever came next, because the secret they'd been carrying alone was about to be revealed. And once that happened, there would be no going back. On the 8th day, they heard the snowmobiles. Liza was outside gathering firewood when the sound cut through the morning silence. 2 engines, high-pitched and mechanical, growing louder. She dropped the wood and ran back to the cabin, her heart hammering. Jay was already at the window, peering through the gap. 2 snowmobiles, he said, 1 rider each. Liza joined him. Through the trees, she could see the vehicles cutting through the deep snow, heading straight for the clearing. They stopped about 50 feet from the cabin. 2 figures climbed off. The first was a woman, tall and lean, probably in her early 70s. She wore a professional winter expedition suit and moved with surprising agility for her age. Her hair was silver white, pulled back in a tight bun. Even from a distance, Liza could see the intelligence in her eyes. The second figure was younger, maybe 40, a man in a similar suit, carrying what looked like equipment cases. The woman approached the cabin and knocked firmly. Her voice was clear, accented with something Eastern European. "My name is Elena Rostova. I'm looking for Liza and Jay Harrington." Liza opened the door. The woman stopped, studying her carefully. "You're Samuel's daughter. You have his eyes." Liza felt tears prick her vision. "You knew my father?" Elena nodded briefly, but he made an impression. "May we come in? We have much to discuss." Liza stepped aside. Elena entered, followed by the younger man. He set down his cases carefully and extended his hand. "I'm Marcus Delacroix," he said with a slight French accent. "Art conservator and authentication specialist. Professor Rostova asked me to accompany her." Jay shook his hand, eyeing the equipment cases. "What's all that?" Marcus smiled. "Portable X-ray fluorescence analyzer, infrared camera, ultraviolet light, magnification equipment. If we're examining pieces from the World War II era, we need to be thorough." Elena was already looking around the cabin, her sharp eyes taking in everything, small but well-maintained. "You've survived the winter here alone?" "We've managed," Liza said. Elena nodded approvingly. Samuel would be proud. He was a survivor too. Now she turned to face them directly. "Your message said you have information about his collection. I need you to understand something before we go further. Samuel Whitmore is a legend in certain circles. He saved dozens of pieces from destruction during the war, but he disappeared in 1951 with those pieces. The art world has spent 70 years wondering what happened to them. If what you're telling me is true, this is one of the most significant discoveries in modern art history." Liza and Jay exchanged glances. "It's true," Liza said quietly. "He hid them here, beneath this cabin." Elena's breath caught. "Show me." Liza led them to the corner. With Jay's help, they moved the bed frame and pulled up the floorboards. Elena knelt at the edge of the opening, staring down into the darkness. "How deep?" she asked. "About 20 feet, Jay said. "There's a ladder." Elena turned to Marcus. "Bring the lights." They descended one by one. Elena went first, moving carefully down the ladder. Marcus followed with portable LED lights that he set up around the chamber. When the space was illuminated, Elena stood in the center and turned in a slow circle, her hand over her mouth. She didn't speak for a full minute. She just stared at the rows of covered paintings, at the carefully organized crates, at the metal boxes containing documentation. Finally, she whispered, "Dear God, it's all here." She approached the nearest crate and read the tag. Monet, Water Lilies, 1899. Her fingers trembled as she carefully, with permission from Liza, began to unwrap the protective covering. When the painting was revealed, Eleanor gasped. Marcus came closer, pulling out a magnifying glass. They examined it in silence, studying the brushwork, the canvas, the frame. "The signature is consistent," Marcus murmured. "The technique matches Monet's late work. The aging of the canvas appears authentic. We'll need to run tests, but my initial assessment is that this is genuine." Elena moved to the next piece. And the next. And the next. Each time her amazement grew. She pulled out the ledger and cross-referenced it with the tags. Everything matched. Every piece was exactly where Samuel had documented it should be. After 2 hours, she climbed back up to the main cabin. Liza and Jay waited anxiously. Elena sat at the small table, her hands shaking. "You need to understand what you have here," she said. "This isn't just a collection. This is a miracle. These pieces were thought lost forever. Museums have empty spaces on their walls where these paintings should hang. Historians have written obituaries for them. And they've been here, safe, preserved, waiting." "What's the value?" Jay asked carefully. Elena pulled out a tablet and began making notes. "Based on current market prices and historical significance," she said slowly, "I would estimate the total value at somewhere between $280 million and $320 million. Possibly more if we factor in the historical importance and the story behind them." Liza felt dizzy. She gripped the edge of the table. "But," Elena continued, raising a finger, "value isn't the issue here. Ownership is. Legal ownership. These pieces were acquired during wartime, during chaos. Some were saved from destruction. Others were evacuated from museums. Your father documented everything, which helps, but there will be questions. Governments will want them. Museums will claim them. Private collectors will try to buy them. You need to understand that the moment this becomes public, your lives will change forever." "We don't want to sell them," Liza said firmly. Elena looked at her with something like relief. "Good, because they shouldn't be sold. They should be preserved, shared, studied. They belong to humanity, not to the highest bidder." "Can you help us do that?" Liza asked. Elena nodded. "Yes, but it will be complicated. We'll need lawyers, conservators, museum partnerships, government approvals. It will take time, maybe years." "We have time," Liza said. "Do you?" Elena asked gently. "Because I need to know something. Does anyone else know about this?" "Our son," Jay said after a hesitation. "He suspects something. His wife definitely suspects. They were here with search and rescue a few weeks ago." Elena's expression darkened. "That complicates things. If they suspect you're hiding something valuable, they may try to claim it. Family law can be messy, especially when this much money is involved." "Derek wouldn't." Liza started, then stopped. She wasn't sure anymore what Derek would or wouldn't do. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. "Here's what I propose. We document everything immediately. Marcus and I will photograph each piece, run authentication tests, verify your father's records. Then we'll draft legal documents establishing you as the rightful heirs and custodians of this collection. We'll file them with the state, the federal government, and the International Art Registry. Once that's done, no one can take this from you without a long, expensive legal battle. And trust me, the art world will fight to keep these pieces protected." "How long will that take?" Jay asked. Marcus spoke up. "If we work fast, maybe 3 days for initial documentation and testing. Another week for the legal paperwork. But we need to do it before anyone else arrives." "The snow's melting," Liza said. "The roads will be passable in a few weeks. Then we work fast," Elena said. They did. For the next 3 days, the cabin became a makeshift laboratory. Marcus set up his equipment in the vault, running tests on each painting. He used the X-ray fluorescence analyzer to verify pigments, the infrared camera to examine underdrawings, the ultraviolet light to check for restorations or forgeries. Elena worked upstairs, cross-referencing Samuel's ledger with historical records she'd brought on a portable hard drive. She matched acquisition dates with known looting events, verified signatures, traced provenance chains back decades. Liza and Jay helped where they could, but mostly they watched in awe as experts confirmed what they'd only hoped was true. Every single piece was authentic. Every single painting was exactly what Samuel had claimed it was. On the third night, Marcus made his final report. Sitting around the fire, he addressed them seriously. "I've examined all 34 pieces. They're real, every one of them. The Monet, the Rembrandt, the Picasso, the Van Gogh, all of them. The preservation is remarkable. Your father knew exactly what he was doing when he built that vault." Elena added her findings. "I've traced the provenance of every piece. They were all legally acquired, mostly saved from destruction or legitimate estate sales during wartime chaos. Some would technically belong to museums that no longer exist. Others were from private collections where the families were killed or displaced. Legally, you have a strong claim as Samuel's heir, especially since he documented everything and acted as a guardian rather than a thief." "So what now?" Liza asked. "Now," Elena said, "we make this official. I've contacted my lawyer, a specialist in art repatriation and estate law. She's drawing up documents that will establish you as the legal custodian of the Whitmore collection. We'll file them with every relevant authority. And then," she paused, "we need to decide what you want to do with them." Liza already knew. She'd been thinking about it for weeks. "I want to create a foundation, something that keeps the collection together, honors my father's work, and makes these pieces accessible to everyone. Not sold off to private collectors, not locked away in some billionaire's mansion, displayed, studied, shared." Elena smiled. "That's exactly what your father would have wanted." They worked through the night, drafting plans. The Whitmore Foundation would be a non-profit organization dedicated to preserving and sharing the collection. The paintings would tour major museums, but always return to a permanent home. "Montana," Liza insisted, "near the cabin where they were hidden. A museum built specifically to house them. Revenue from touring exhibitions would fund art education programs, conservation training, and research into looted art recovery. It would be a living memorial to Samuel Whitmore and his mission." By dawn, they had a plan. Elena and Marcus would return to civilization, file the necessary paperwork, and begin reaching out to museum partners. Liza and Jay would stay at the cabin until the legal protections were in place. Then, when it was safe, they'd go public. Before Elena and Marcus left, Elena took Liza aside. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "When this goes public, people will come. Journalists, historians, government officials. Your son will certainly hear about it. Are you prepared for that?" Liza looked out at the mountains, at the endless white landscape. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to reconcile with him, but part of me knows he chose money over family. How do I forgive that?" Elena put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe you don't forgive. Maybe you just move forward. Maybe you show him that you didn't need his approval or his inheritance to matter. Maybe you show him what real worth looks like." Liza nodded slowly. "Thank you for everything." Eleanor smiled. "Thank your father. He did the hard part. You're just finishing what he started." They watched as Elena and Marcus packed up their equipment and climbed onto the snowmobiles. The engines roared to life, and they disappeared into the forest, leaving Liza and Jay alone again. But this time the silence felt different. Not oppressive or isolating, but peaceful. They'd taken the first step. The secret was no longer theirs alone to carry. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. They fell back into their routine, but with less fear, less uncertainty. The documentation was filed, The lawyers were working, the wheels were in motion. Spring arrived gradually. The snow began to melt. Streams of water ran down from the mountains, cutting channels through the white. The temperature rose above freezing during the day. Birds returned, their songs filling the air. One morning, Liza woke to the sound of dripping water. She stepped outside and saw the roof of the cabin shedding its heavy snow load. Icicles dripped from the eaves. Patches of brown earth appeared in the clearing. "Spring," she whispered. Jay joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "We made it." She leaned against him. "We did." That afternoon they heard an engine. Not a helicopter this time, but a truck. It labored up the old logging road, closer than any vehicle had come in months. Liza and Jay stood in front of the cabin, waiting. The truck emerged from the trees. It was Derek's black Escalade, mud-splattered and scratched from the rough road. It stopped in the clearing. Derek climbed out alone. He looked different, thinner, older. His expensive clothes were wrinkled. His hair was unwashed. He walked toward them slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "Where's Vanessa?" Jay asked. Derek's jaw tightened. "Gone. We're getting divorced." Liza felt something shift in her chest. What happened? Derek ran a hand through his hair. She left when she realized there was nothing here. No hidden treasure, no valuable property. Just an old cabin and two stubborn people who refused to die quietly. He tried to smile, but it came out bitter. "I spent 3 months looking for you. Spent thousands hiring private investigators, search teams, anyone who could help. Vanessa thought I was wasting money. She said I should let you go, move on, focus on the land deal. When I refused, she left." "Good," Liza said quietly. Derek looked at her, surprised. "She was poison," Liza continued. "She made you forget who you were, where you came from. Maybe losing her will help you remember." Derek's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, "for everything, for the things I said, the way I treated you, for choosing her over you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry." Liza studied her son. She saw the boy he'd been, the man he'd become, and maybe, just maybe, the man he could still be. "Come inside," she said. They sat around the small table, drinking coffee from tin cups. Derek looked around the cabin, taking in the improvements they'd made, the way they'd survived. "You did all this yourselves?" he asked. "We did," Jay said. Derek shook his head in wonder. "I underestimated you, both of you. I thought," he paused, "I thought you were fragile, weak, that you needed me to take care of you. But you were always stronger than me." "Not stronger," Liza said, "just more stubborn." Derek laughed, a real laugh that sounded like the boy she remembered. Maybe that's the same thing. They talked for hours. Derek told them about the divorce proceedings, about selling the luxury house, about moving back to a smaller place. He'd quit his job at the corporate law firm and started doing pro bono work for family legal aid. He was trying, in his own way, to make amends. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Stay here?" Liza and Jay exchanged glances. "There's something we need to tell you," Liza said. She told him everything, about the vault, the paintings, Samuel's mission, the authentication, the foundation. Derek listened in stunned silence, his coffee growing cold in his hands. When she finished, he sat back, overwhelmed. "So you've been sitting on a $300 million art collection this whole time?" "Yes," Liza said. "And I threw you out," he whispered. "I threw you out and tried to steal your land while you were sitting on one of the greatest art discoveries in history. We didn't know about it when you threw us out," Jay said quietly. "We found it after." Derek put his head in his hands. Oh God, Vanessa was right. There was treasure here. If she knew, if she'd stayed, she would have tried to take it all. "Which is why we didn't tell you," Liza said. "We couldn't trust you, not with her in your life." Derek looked up, tears streaming down his face. "And now? Can you trust me now?" Liza thought carefully before answering. I don't know yet, but I want to. I want my son back. Derek broke down completely. He sobbed like he hadn't allowed himself to in years, all the grief and shame and regret pouring out. Liza moved around the table and held him, this man who was still, somehow, her little boy. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this right, he said between sobs. I promise. You can start, Jay said gently, by helping us build the foundation. We'll need legal help, someone who understands estate law and non-profit structures, someone we can trust. Derek wiped his eyes. I'll do it, whatever you need. One condition, Liza said. The foundation honors your grandfather's memory, not ours. This was his legacy. We're just the caretakers. Derek nodded. Agreed. They spent the next week at the cabin together, planning. Derek proved himself useful, drafting legal documents, making calls to museums and government agencies, using his legal training to navigate the complex world of art repatriation and cultural heritage law. Elena returned with a full team. Conservators carefully transported the paintings to a secure climate-controlled facility in Missoula. Each piece was photographed, catalogued, and insured. The process was meticulous, reverent, and then, on a warm May morning, they held a press conference. The University of Montana's art building was packed. Journalists from around the world had flown in, representatives from major museums, government officials, art historians. They filled every seat, lined the walls, spilled out into the hallways. Liza stood at the podium, Jay beside her, Derek behind them. Elena sat in the front row, smiling encouragement. Liza had never spoken in front of this many people before. Her hands shook as she gripped the podium. But when she began to speak, her voice was steady. My name is Liza Harrington, and I'm here to tell you about my father, Samuel Whitmore. She told the story. All of it. Samuel's work in Paris before the war, his desperate efforts to save art from destruction, his flight to America, his decision to hide the collection rather than risk losing it to politics and greed, his quiet life in Montana, protecting these pieces until the world was ready for them. She talked about inheriting the cabin, about being disowned by her son, about surviving a brutal winter in the wilderness, about finding the vault and understanding, finally, what her father had been protecting all those years. And now, she said, her voice growing stronger, we're creating the Whitmore Foundation. These 34 paintings will not be sold. They will not be scattered to private collections. They will be preserved, studied, and shared with the world. They will tour museums so everyone, regardless of wealth or status, can experience their beauty. And they will eventually return to a permanent home here in Montana, where my father chose to protect them. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Journalists shouted questions. But Liza stepped back from the podium. She'd said what she needed to say. Eleanor took over, fielding technical questions about authentication and provenance. Derek handled legal questions about ownership and non-profit structure. Marcus discussed conservation efforts. Liza and Jay slipped out a side door and found a quiet bench in the courtyard outside. They sat in the spring sunshine holding hands, letting the warmth soak into their bones. We did it, Jay whispered. No, Liza said. My father did it. We just finished what he started. He would be proud of you. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I hope so. The months that followed were a whirlwind. The story went viral. Every major news outlet covered it. People called it the greatest art discovery of the century. Scholars wrote papers about Samuel's collection. Museums fought to host the first exhibition. But through it all, Liza and Jay remained grounded. They moved into a small house in Missoula, close to the university where the foundation was based. They didn't need anything grand. They'd learned in that frozen cabin that happiness wasn't measured in square footage or luxury. Derek kept his promise. He worked tirelessly for the foundation, handling all legal matters, never asking for recognition or compensation beyond a modest salary. Slowly, painfully. He rebuilt trust with his parents. One afternoon, Liza invited him to the new Whitmore Heritage Center, a beautiful building designed specifically to house the collection when it returned from its world tour. It wasn't finished yet, but the bones were there. Clean lines, natural light, spaces designed to honor both the art and the story behind it. They stood in what would become the main gallery, sunlight streaming through tall windows. "Your grandfather would love this," Liza said. Derek nodded. "I wish I'd known him better." "He left you something," Liza said. She pulled out a small envelope, aged and yellowed. "I found it in his journals. It's addressed to his future grandson." Derek's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Samuel's handwriting careful and deliberate. "To my grandson, if you're reading this, then Liza has told you about the collection. I hope you understand why I hid them. In my lifetime, I saw beautiful things destroyed by greed, by war, by people who valued money over meaning. I couldn't let that happen to these pieces. I also hope you understand that real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in what you protect, what you preserve, what you pass on to the next generation. Your grandmother and I didn't have much money, but we had love, integrity, purpose. Those things matter more than any painting ever could. Be proud of where you come from. Be proud of your mother, who survived more than most people could imagine. Be proud of hard work, of calloused hands, of lives lived with dignity. And if you ever forget that, look at these paintings. They survived because someone cared enough to save them. Be that kind of person. Be someone who saves things worth saving. With hope for your future, your grandfather, Samuel Whitmore." Derek read it twice, tears streaming down his face. He folded the letter carefully and looked at his mother. "I failed him," he whispered. "I forgot everything he wanted me to remember." Liza put her hand on his shoulder. "But you're remembering now, and that's what matters." The first major exhibition opened at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Liza and Jay flew out for the opening, their first time on an airplane in 30 years. They walked through the gallery, surrounded by art lovers and scholars, and watched people experience the paintings their father had protected. A young girl stood in front of the Monet, her eyes wide with wonder. Her mother knelt beside her, explaining the brush strokes, the way light played on water. Liza watched them and felt something break open in her chest. This was why. This was what her father had been protecting. Not the monetary value, but this moment, this passing of beauty from one generation to the next. That evening, at a gala celebrating the exhibition, a reporter approached her. "Mrs. Harrington, you could have sold these paintings and lived like royalty for the rest of your life. Why didn't you?" Liza thought about the question. She thought about the cabin, the frozen winter, the moment she'd first seen those paintings in the vault. She thought about her father's hands, scarred and strong, protecting something precious. "Because some things are worth more than money," she said simply. "And if you have to sell them to survive, they lose their meaning. My father understood that. He taught me that real wealth is measured in what you give, not what you take." The reporter wrote it down, nodding slowly. Later that night, back in their hotel room, Jay turned to her. "Do you regret any of it? Losing the farm, the winter in the cabin, all of it?" Liza looked out the window at the city lights. "No," she said, "because if none of that had happened, we would never have found what my father left us. And I don't just mean the paintings, I mean the lesson. The reminder that we're stronger than we think, that family is fragile but can be rebuilt, that beauty is worth protecting, even when the world tells you to give up." Jay pulled her close. "You sound like him, your father." She smiled. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. A year after the discovery, the Whitmore Heritage Center officially opened in Montana. It was a crisp October day, the mountains painted gold and red with autumn. Hundreds of people attended the ceremony. Museum directors, art scholars, local families, students. Derek gave a speech about his grandfather's legacy and his own journey back to understanding what mattered. His voice cracked when he thanked his parents for not giving up on him. Eleanor spoke about Samuel's courage and the importance of protecting cultural heritage. She announced a new scholarship program funded by the foundation, supporting students studying art conservation and history. Then it was Liza's turn. She stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. She saw her son, changed and humble. She saw Elena, who'd helped them navigate impossible challenges. She saw Jay, her partner through everything, his silver hair catching the sunlight, and she saw, in her mind's eye, her father, standing in the back of the crowd, smiling. "My father once wrote," she began, "that some secrets are too heavy to carry until you're strong enough. I spent most of my life thinking I was weak. I thought survival was the best I could hope for. But this past year taught me something different. It taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. It's about protecting what matters, even when the world tells you to let it go. It's about believing that beauty and history and truth are worth fighting for." She gestured to the building behind her. "This center isn't just about paintings. It's about remembering that we're all guardians of something precious. Maybe it's art, maybe it's family, maybe it's just the belief that people can change and grow and become better than they were." She looked directly at Derek. "My son learned that lesson the hard way. But he learned it. And that's what matters." Derek wiped tears from his eyes. Liza continued. "These paintings survived wars, fires, thieves, and time itself. They survived because one man believed they were worth saving. And now they're here, not locked away in some private vault, but shared with all of you, with everyone. Because beauty shouldn't belong to the wealthy. It should belong to everyone willing to see it." The crowd rose to its feet, applause thundering across the mountain valley. Afterward, Liza and Jay took a quiet walk through the center. They stopped in front of the Monet, the water lilies floating in their eternal peace. "Think he's watching?" Jay asked. Liza nodded. "I think he's been watching all along." That evening, just the three of them, Liza, Jay, and Derek, drove out to the cabin. It had been preserved as part of the Heritage Center grounds, restored but not modernized, kept as a reminder of where it all began. They built a fire in the old stone fireplace and sat around it, just like they had during that long winter. Derek spoke first. "I've been thinking about what Grandfather wrote, about being someone who saves things worth saving. I want to be that person." "You already are," Liza said. "You saved yourself. And you're helping save this legacy." "What will you do now?" Derek asked. "Retire? Travel?" Liza laughed. "Retire? I'm 68 years old and I just survived winter in the wilderness and built an art foundation from nothing. I'm just getting started." Jay grinned. "She's unstoppable. Always has been." They sat in comfortable silence watching the fire burn. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under a sky full of stars. Derek finally spoke again, his voice soft. "I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to understand what mattered." Liza reached over and took his hand. "Sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find our way back." They stayed at the cabin until the fire burned down to embers. Before they left, Liza walked to the corner where the vault entrance had been. It was sealed now, a glass panel installed so visitors could see where the paintings had been hidden for so many years. She placed her hand on the glass. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for trusting me, for believing I'd be strong enough when the time came." In the darkness of the vault below, empty now but still sacred, her words seemed to echo and fade into something that felt like peace. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. 5 years later, the Whitmore Foundation had grown beyond anything Liza had imagined. The collection had toured every major museum in North America and Europe. Millions of people had seen the paintings. Thousands of students had received scholarships. Dozens of looted artworks had been reunited with their rightful owners through the Foundation's research initiatives. Liza and Jay still lived simply in their small house in Missoula. They walked to the Heritage Center most days, greeting visitors, telling stories, answering questions about Samuel and the incredible winter that changed everything. Derek had become the Foundation's legal director. He'd remarried a kind woman named Sarah who taught elementary school and loved art. They had a daughter, a bright-eyed 6-year-old named Samantha, after her great-grandfather Samuel. One summer afternoon, Liza was giving a tour to a group of school children when Samantha ran up to her, pigtails bouncing.
Grandma, I drew you a picture."
She held up a crayon drawing of the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, 2 stick figures standing in front, holding hands. "That's you and Grandpa," Samantha explained. "Surviving winter." Liza knelt down and pulled her granddaughter into a hug. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, just like you." After the tour ended, Liza found Jay sitting on a bench in the sculpture garden outside the center. He'd been having trouble with his leg lately, the old injury finally catching up with him. But he never complained. She sat beside him, and they watched the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The simplicity of that winter, when it was just us against the world?" Liza thought about it. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember how cold we were, how scared, how uncertain. This is better. This is what we fought for." She gestured to the center, where families still wandered through the galleries, experiencing the art Samuel had saved. "We turned pain into purpose," she said. "We turned loss into legacy. And maybe that's the best kind of alchemy there is." Jay took her hand. "Couldn't have done it without you." She smiled. "We did it together, like we always do." As the sun dipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared, Liza felt a profound sense of completion. They'd started with nothing but each other and a broken-down cabin. They'd survived winter, betrayal, uncertainty, and fear. And they'd emerged with something that would outlast them, something that would touch lives for generations, something that proved value wasn't measured in money, but in meaning. Her father had saved the paintings. She'd saved his legacy. And together they'd saved something else. Hope. Proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they were brave enough to try. Because for Liza and Jay and everyone who would follow their example, true wealth was never about what you owned. It was about what you protected, what you preserved, and what you passed on to those who came after. And that was a fortune no one could ever take away. As morning sun warmed the stone walls of the Whitmore Heritage Center, Liza Harrington didn't reach for a wrench or a toolbox anymore. She reached for her granddaughter's hand, ready to show her the paintings that had changed their lives and teach her the lesson Samuel had taught her so many years ago. That beauty is worth protecting, that family can be rebuilt, and that sometimes the people who discard you simply can't see what you're truly worth. The mechanic's daughter, who was thrown out to freeze, had become the guardian of one of the world's greatest art collections. Because for Liza, and for everyone she fought for, being disowned wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something far greater. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice and that real worth can never be taken away, only revealed.